We have OWTU rep Ozzi Warwick. Pleasant good evening to you, comrade.
Hey, yes, good evening, Comrade Mikee K. Nice to hear you. How are you doing?
Good. Just to clear things up, you are the Education and Research Officer.
Yes, Chief Education Research Officer, that's right.
That's good. And of course, you sent off a letter to the Honorable Colm Imbert, Minister of Finance and Economy, writing to express your deepest concern about 4 real bread and butter issues, among many others facing ordinary working women and men who are among the poorest in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And these issues were articulated on June 19th on Labor Day Celebration 2023 platform in Faizabad, where it was raised several critical issues and demands. 1, increase the minimum wage. 2, no NIB penalty for retiring at age 60. 3, no property tax at this time. 4, reduce fuel prices. Expand on this. I mean, what stood out for me is the fact that the poorest in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, most people would say, listen, I don't think that that's a fact, but there are many people who are economically vulnerable and have been suffering even before the pandemic. So please expand on this.
Yes, thanks a lot, Mikey, for giving me the opportunity. What we wanted to do here, Mikey, was to highlight what we consider to be real bread and butter issues. Because if you listen to the national conversation, with the exception of persons like yourself, but I'm talking about policymakers, even these economists and commentators, you realize, wait now, nobody talking about ordinary poor people. Nobody talking about how much they have the economic burden that they have had to bear over the last few years. And I'm glad that you qualify it by saying before COVID, because people like to use COVID as an excuse. But even before COVID, and we recognize that, wait, who is speaking for them? Who is speaking on behalf of them? And, people tend to say that, trade unions are only concerned about their membership and so on. So we said, you know what, let us focus on a group of our citizens who are really voiceless. They have no organization that represents them. They are not part of any institution. And you recognize that the government is hell-bent on pursuing economic policies that is doing nothing more than taking cash out of the hands and pockets of these poor, ordinary people. And that is the context in which we decided to outline 4 core issues. Now, let's just take them one by one, if you allow me.
Yes, go ahead.
Increasing the minimum wage. Over the last few years, Mikey, and I know that anybody who is a normal person in this country, who goes to the grocery, the pharmacy, the hardware, the retail store, the fact is that prices significantly have increased. And we ask ourselves, people who are living on minimum wage, right? It's fixed wage, you're talking about $2,400 a month. How do they make out when a grocery bill, which would have been, let's say, $500, going up to $800 and even $1,000? What do they do when their rent goes from, let's say, $750 to $1,500? Nobody is talking about how they are making out. And we felt that, listen, it's time to increase the minimum wage.
Right.
And there's no way that, let me put it the other way. The only how people are surviving, and it's mere survival now, is because, let me be frank, they borrow a little money from this friend, from this cousin, from that one to pay back off the next one, or they take things on credit. I mean, and that is how our citizens in 2023 is living, Mikey.
And I understand that, but let me interject here. Now, this letter that was sent to Mr. Imbert on the issue of increasing the minimum wage, reduce fuel prices, no NIB penalty for retiring at the age of 60, no property tax at this time. This letter is signed by Ansel Roger, the president of JTUB, Michael Anisant, the general secretary of NATUC, and Joseph Remy, the president of FITON, and it has been copied to the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar. Now, there's one paragraph in the letter that says, single-parent mothers today have to risk their lives in this country where crime is at a phenomenal all-time high traveling to and from work at all hours of the night and day. You also mentioned workers in fast food outlets, gas stations, retail stores, hardwares, and you spoke about how are these low-income earners expected to survive. Well, I think there was a policy under the People's Partnership for these very same single-parent mothers. There was also something there to help out as far as every holiday. There would have been an ease as far as buying grocery items, and the list goes on. What are we seeing playing out here? Because there are people who would say, listen, comrade, I mean, there were policies for these things. It was working. Then what was the issue politically?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that we are trying to highlight is to bring to the forefront that the actual policies of this particular regime is to reverse all of those things and more, and to reverse even structural things. For example, the reversal of fuel subsidies. Now we find ourselves in a situation, and we're not getting anybody talking about it. The fact is, we're paying our tax now, you know.
Right.
But in the letter, we were able to show that premium and super Mikey, we are in Trinidad and Tobago, we are paying more than in places like Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, Mississippi. Imagine people in the U.S. whose minimum wage is almost 5 to 10 times higher than us. We are paying more on super and premium. All right? Why? Because they reversed a critical, important measure that was put in place to mitigate the growing inflation and growing cost of living for ordinary working people. And we felt that, wait, but nobody talking about that. The same people and commentators and economists who are out there, the subsidies are this and that and the other, and they should remove subsidies and so on. Where are their voices now when we are saying, hey, wait now, but you said you're removing these subsidies so that it will be market rate at the fuel pump, but oil price has since been falling and there have been no reduction at the pump. Then you have to reduce the fuel price. So the point I'm making is that what we are seeing is a regime that is systematically reversing measures that were put in place a long time ago and more recently, as you have highlighted, under the partnership.
Yeah, and added to the fact that, you know, so many people lost their jobs in the heights of the pandemic. There was no economic lifeline. There was nothing there to safeguard those who were most vulnerable. Now we're paying a price for that. An economy that is totally stagnant and isn't moving. And so is it that all of these things that you're asking for is not going to be realistic if, in fact, government does not have the means, the ways, and, of course, the money to facilitate it?
Mikey, they have the money. They have the ways. They have the means. What they do not have is the vision and or will. That's the difference, you know. And, you know, when you talk about the economy, I'm glad you raised it, because sometimes we think of the economy as something abstract, something out there. I want to use, for example, the contradiction of the Minister of Finance, who loves to come every Monday morning boasting about IMF saying that he's doing a good job. Moody's ratings is X, Y, and Z. But Mikey, how does that affect the fact that I can no longer feed my children? I have to struggle to make sure I could borrow some money to pay rent because the landlord coming to throw me out. The fact that I have no job at all and there is no prospect for a job. So there's a huge disconnect between what is articulated in the public by the policymakers in terms of the economy is doing well versus the reality, because you know why Moody's can give rating like that? It's because ordinary poor people had to suffer. And that contradiction, that fundamental contradiction, is what they are not prepared to address.
And let me ask you this, comrade. Take us back to that perhaps first meeting before Dr. Rowley took office in the capacity of Prime Minister. Were there many expectations? I mean, were there people who basically believed that, listen, he could deliver, he had the ability to deliver, and perhaps was willing to compromise to see what he can actually do for this country?
Yeah, I think that there were people who would have believed that, but more so, you would have recalled that there was this, one can argue, a political commitment to what is called social dialogue.
All right.
But that has collapsed.
But let me ask you this. Did he renege on that commitment?
Well, renege, I don't even think is a strong enough term, Mikey. He has, in fact, to me, not just reneged, he has completely abandoned that approach to governance. And let me tell you something, Mikey, it's not just the trade unions. Remember, they put in place, under much fanfare, the Economic Advisory Committee. I wonder how many people remember that.
Yeah.
That was led by Dr. Trevor Farrell. We have heard nothing about the recommendations that committee made. Instead, what has happened is the committee, just like NTAC, collapsed. So when people accuse the unions, oh, y'all walk away from NTAC, y'all are the ones who collapsed NTAC. I had to ask, but wait, y'all just like to beat up on workers because the economists and they walk away as well from the Economic Advisory Committee. How come you're not telling them to go back and to work with Dr. Rowley? Why is only trade unions must do that? No. We will not be a bubbly. So the point I'm making, Mikey, these are just concrete examples of a fundamental thinking among this regime that suggests that in order for the economy to work, poor people must suffer. And I believe that psychologically, that the Prime Minister honestly deeply believes that poor people must suffer.
All right. And let me ask you, as we wrap it up here, our time is basically up. If there's no response or from this correspondence, is the next move, what is going to be the next move?
Well, one of the moves I guess you would see is our continued campaigning to say to people, listen, this is what we have put on the agenda. This is what we think the government should be addressing leading up to local government elections. And if they are not addressing these things, then you have to use the power of your finger to do what is correct.
Understood. Thank you so much, comrade, for taking time out to link with us here this evening. It's been a pleasure as always. Keep up the good work and best of luck to you and your team.
Yes, thank you very much. You too. Keep up the good work.